Hi guys, and welcome back to another episode on the Slumbering Times. Part 1. Early Life and the Call to the Sea. Imagine Bristol in the 1680s, a city that smells simultaneously of fish guts, rotting tar, and unwashed ambition. The docks are a theatre of dust-choked saw pits, the blow of hammers on oak planks, and the raucous songs of crews unloading sugar barrels that bear the grim brand of the transatlantic slave trade. Amid this cacophony stands a boy, Edward Teach. Though no one suspects, he'll one day inspire bedtime warnings about men whose beards resemble wild hedgerows, plotting mutiny. He's just another ragged urchin with sunburnt cheeks and a pair of curious eyes fixed on vessels bound for the Americas. If you squint, you might spot the future Blackbeard in his posture, a lean frame, shoulders already curved by hauling rope, a head full of dreams bigger than Bristol's greasy alleyways. Yet for now, he's an apprentice in a cooper's yard, learning that every barrel must be watertight, or risk drowning the profits of some absentee planter who won't care what happened to his molasses shipment. Before we continue, a very quick bit of housekeeping. If you enjoy the video, please do consider leaving a like and subscribing. It really helps the channel to grow. Also, I'd love to hear in the comments where you guys are listening from and what time it is there. It's really cool to hear what part of the world people are tuning in from. Thanks, guys. Now, back to the video. Bristol's rise from a modest riverside settlement to England's second largest port owes much to the Restoration under Charles II. Once the stifling Puritan Commonwealth gave way to royal excess, in 1660, merchants discovered that political favour and generous navigation acts could transform their ledgers overnight. By 1651, Parliament's decrees demanded all colonial goods, tobacco, sugar, indigo, transit through English harbours aboard English ships. Result? Bristol's docks swelled with profits and human misery. Guilds like the Society of Merchant Venturers became power brokers, orchestrating the triangular trade. Cloth and guns to West Africa, enslaved Africans to the Caribbean and New World plantations, and back to Bristol flooded rum, molasses, and the stench of fortunes built on forced labour. If history had a punchline, it would read, "England gets rich, colonies get fleeced, Africans get enslaved, all under the banner of free trade." In the back alleys, where Teach's family likely eked out an existence, the air teems with whispers of press gangs. Royal Navy recruiters, more accurately kidnappers, prowl taverns, dragging unsuspecting labourers below decks to serve lords and kings who view them as cannon fodder. The 9 Years' War against Louis XIV's France rages from 1688 to 1697, swelling the fleet's ranks and leaving thousands impressed sailors cursing God and monarchy with equal fervour. For a labourer's son, there's no greater nightmare than the dark belly of a man of war, where masts creak with secret knots, rats gnaw on rope yarns, and the lash of the cat o' nine tails is the common greeting. Young Edward, apprenticed perhaps to a rope-maker or cooper, would have learned such trades as a means of survival and a hedge against being pressed into the Navy's service. Meanwhile, Bristol's streets pulse with the fallout of national upheavals. In 1685, James Scott, Duke of Monmouth, leads a Protestant rebellion against his uncle King James II, only to be brutally crushed at Sedgemoor. Survivors, some shipped off as indentured servants to Virginia plantations, blur the lines between convict and colonist. Nobody in Bristol forgets how swiftly you can go from tavern reveller to slave trader's property. By 1688, the glorious revolution sweeps James II aside for William and Mary, a bloodless coup touted as a triumph for parliamentary rights and Protestantism, but really, it cements mercantile interests. Its grand promise of liberty feels hollow to impoverished families like Teach's. Liberty, in practice, means the right to profit off human lives and the freedom to slam the door on beggars who might ask for alms. Record-keeping for lower-class births is patchy at best. so historians guess Edward Teach sprang into the world around 1680. No baptismal font bears his name with any certainty. Instead, we find an empty parish ledger, perfect for legend-making. What we can safely imagine, and gently salt with humour, is young Edward's first taste of the sea. A clumsy rowboat ride across the Avon, the oars slapping water like dull drumbeats, the river's mud squelching underfoot. Maybe he glimpsed a merchant sloop bound for Bilbao or Boston, its crew laughing at sea tales or arguing over a stolen deck of cards. The scent of tar from freshly corked hulls, the tang of salt that drifts upriver. These sensations lodge in his memory, portents of a life he doesn't yet understand. By the turn of the century, Europe is embroiled in the War of the Spanish Succession, 1701 to 1713. Charles II of Spain dies childless in 1700, and the scramble to place a new monarch, Spain's Philip V, backed by France, versus rival Habsburg claimants, sparks conflict across the continent and overseas. England, allied with the Dutch Republic and Austria, issues letters of marque to privateers, legal corsairs authorized to seize enemy vessels for profit, provided they surrender a cut to the crown. For resource-starved Bristol lads, privateering resembles blue-collar rebellion. You fight, you plunder, and you split the takings. No more corn cobs for dinner, no more fear of mistaken kidnapping. Put a crisp letter of marque in your pocket, and your marauding becomes patriotic duty. Teach, now a strapping young man with sinewed arms and a mischievous grin, probably signed aboard a privateer sloop by 1702. Picture him boarding a ship like the Prosperous Adventure, its name an ironic harbinger, given how many such vessels were crippled by storms, plague, or bored screw-ups who fell overboard after a bout of bad rum. At sea, he learns essential skills: how to read the wind in the telltales, splice cable with surgeon-like precision, and deliver a cutlass blow that splinters bone rather than coat the blade. He observes captains use grape shot to rattle enemy decks into submission, capturing the vessel intact to sell its cargo at auction rather than scuttle it for glory. These aren't mere anecdotes, they're the building blocks of his future reputation for ruthless efficiency and theatrical intimidation. Yet privateering has its discontents. When the Treaty of Utrecht finally ends the war in 1713, Britain pockets territories like Newfoundland and Gibraltar, and insists on the Asiento, the monopoly on shipping enslaved Africans to Spanish America. But thousands of privateers, their commissions now worthless scraps of paper, return home to find ports clogged with skilled seamen and no ships hiring. The Crown, always eager for cheap labour, quietly looks the other way as many resort to outright piracy. Enter Nassau, a derelict Spanish stronghold in the Bahamas, its coral reefs making naval pursuit a headache. With no effective governor, or one easily bribed, Nassau becomes a carnival of desperate former privateers who set up ephemeral codes to share plunder, elect captains, and punish offenders by marooning them on uninhabited quays. Our Edward Teach, shaped by years of dodging press gangs, hauling dunnage barrels, and boarding ships under the Union Jack, arrives in Nassau, ready to test the boundaries of his greying soul. He cuts a striking figure, tall enough to loom over most, dark beard curling around his jawline like the tentacles of a sea creature, eyes reflecting a glint that suggests he's already weighing the risk-reward ratio of every moment. According to the scant records, he's charismatic yet inscrutable, generous with coin to win loyalty, merciless when crossed. This persona doesn't emerge overnight. It percolates through youthful humiliations, brutal floggings for minor infractions, near starvation stints on prizes that fail to fetch buyers. The realization that treaties between kings mean nothing to men who eat salt pork and spit out oaths at dawn. While the gaps in Teach's personal history invite fiction, they don't warrant romanticizing. Instead, let's paint him as a product of his world. a lad who learned cynicism early, watching Bristol merchants toast lavish receptions while he scrubbed decks for a pittance. As press gangs dragged away neighbours, he vowed he'd never be someone else's chattel. Each battle, whether a skirmish with a Spanish galliot or a chase after a French bark, honed his capacity for swift decisions. A hurricane off the Windward Islands might have shattered his first command, marooning him on a reef strewn with broken masts and smashed crockery. Yet even that disaster yields benefit. He scavenges a tattered map pointing to secluded coves and uncharted quays, potential hideouts where treasure might lie unguarded. Treaties mean nothing, and naval codes are reduced to driftwood. In these formative years, Teach's brand of piracy grows from the same root as privateering, with one crucial difference: he no longer bothers with paperwork. The letter of marque is too flimsy. Crowns revoke them when political winds shift. Pirates like Teach recognize a simple truth the empire ignores: violence and commerce intertwine seamlessly, and if governments won't protect your welfare, you'll protect and profit off yourself. Teach's transition from privateer to pirate required only a bureaucratic wrinkle and the convenient disappearance of his commission. To him, and to many others, the sea is the great equalizer, indifferent to titles, dismissive of hierarchies, demanding only that you row true and fight hard. Behind the swagger lies a mind attuned to propaganda. Teach understands that fear can be more valuable than gold. A beard woven into ominous braids, slow-rolling his laughter at prize auctions, a penchant for carrying slow-burn fuses amid smoke pots, all amplify his reputation. When colonial governors later shiver at the thought of Captain Blackbeard, they remember not just ships lost, but lives upended. Yet even this menace traces to Bristol's grit, the crushing inequities, the sense that law and order protect property, not people. So he fashions a counter-state on the open ocean, one where spoils are shared, captains elected, and refusal to follow orders merits a swim with sharks or a taste of rum-soaked powder. Thus, from Bristol's tar-stained docks to Nassau's coral-rimmed hideaways, Teach's journey unfolds, a passage from apprentice cooper to letter of marque privateer to outlaw pirate. Each stage reflects the era's contradictions: mercantilism cloaked as progress, war waged for commerce, treaties drawn up over the heads of those who rowed the boats. In his twisted way, Teach turns these absurdities into opportunity. And so, as dusk falls on part 1 of Blackbeard's saga, we leave young Edward poised between two worlds, one of violence sanctioned by crowns, the other of violence sanctioned only by necessity and ambition. His shadow stretches across the water, and up ahead lie seas uncharted by any king's map, seas that would become his domain. Part 2. The Beard Awakens, Rise to Command and Fearsome Image. By the spring of 1716, Nassau looked less like a sun-drenched haven in the Bahamas and more like a rowdy tavern explosion drifting atop half-rotten hulks. The crash of timbers and the clang of overturned rum kegs echoed through its narrow alleys, where once respectable privateers, scowling over emptied bottles, had eagerly exchanged letters of marque for a collective shrug at any higher power. In this floating junkyard, masquerading as a town, idleness bred mischief. An out-of-work seaman, with a knack for cannonry, found it simpler to sack Spanish merchantmen than trudge back to an unpaid berth in the Royal Navy. Into this void strode Edward Teach, later immortalized as Blackbeard, freshly discharged from the War of the Spanish Succession and brimming with both ambition and impatience. Teach's first move was to join forces with Benjamin Hornigold, a fellow Devonshire man whose trajectory from privateer captain to pirate patriarch epitomized the era's absurdity. Hornigold had proven his mettle against the French and Spanish, picking off straggling galleons with surgical precision and hoarding enough wildly acquired silver to buy every bottle of rum in Nassau, twice over. but with peace treaties ringing the death knell for privateering, Hornigold found himself captain of a crew more restless than a nest of hornets. Teach arrived just in time, offering muscle, seamanship, and a willingness to ignore the nationality of any prize worth the trouble. Where Hornigold hesitated at British ships, clinging to an ancestral loyalty, Teach saw only coin and the sweet tang of mutiny awaiting a spark. Shallow Bahamian reefs, notorious for wrecking pursuing man-o'-wars, served as natural barriers that turnkey admirals could neither navigate nor ignore. Here, amid labyrinthine quays crowned with palms and punctuated by half-sunk merchant hulls, Teach honed a new democracy of deception. Votes on plunder shares, councils in the open air beneath glittering constellations, and a code more equitable than any royal charter. Should a sailor lose a limb in the fight, he received smart money from the communal chest to grease his wheelbarrow, while captains and quartermasters pocketed double shares, an incentive that merged pragmatism with a veneer of fairness. This rough-and-ready egalitarianism stood in bold relief against naval life, where a commodore's dinner featured silver plate while his men gnawed weevil-ridden hardtack. As Teach's reputation grew, so did the ornamentation of his appearance. What began as a protective guard against sunburn and salt water evolved into an icon, a beard woven into snarled braids, each tied off with ribbons plucked from captured merchant wardrobes. Rumour whispered that he wore lit slow matches, hemp cords steeped in saltpetre, tucked under his hat, so that in the heat of boarding an enemy vessel he'd appear wreathed in smoke and flame, a living harbinger of hell's own fury. By night, townsfolk in Nassau claimed to glimpse a frightful meteor gliding across the docks, the ember-dangled beard glowing like a demon's torch. British authority in the Bahamas had long since collapsed. Governor's orders, dispatched from Jamaica, piled up in some official's trunk unopened, while Nassau's lone fort rotted until it looked more like a sandcastle on the verge of collapse. Across the Atlantic, Britain's mercantilist machinery hummed along. The Royal African Company and the South Sea Company funneled wealth through London's gilded halls, while the Asiento provision of the Treaty of Utrecht awkwardly allowed Spanish America to import British slaves. Irony reigned supreme as escaped bondmen joined pirate crews, only to be broken by fellow buccaneers turned slave raiders. In this topsy-turvy world, Teach and Hornigold plied their trade, swooping down on French and Spanish convoys laden with Peruvian silver, Mexican cacao, and rum, prizes that would taste of rebellion as much as of sugar. Teach first cut his teeth as Hornigold's lieutenant, leading raids off Florida's coast, where Spanish silver fleets, stretched out like wounded beasts, presented tempting targets. His tactics were simple, brutal, and effective. Under the cover of night, sloops no deeper than a whaleboat would glide into narrow straits, then unleash volleys of grape-shot into unsuspecting merchant masts. Crews, half drunk on stale grog, balked at hand-to-hand fighting once they caught sight of that fearsome braided beard and the pistols strapped across his broad chest. Plundered cargoes were spirited back through hidden channels to eager Nassau fences, who paid in coin or promise of more rum. Between raids, Teach drilled his men. Every swab and powder monkey learned to fire a musket in one motion, reload under duress, and load cannon to bursting point without spilling a single grain of powder. By late 1717, the last embers of Hornigold's half-hearted patriotism flickered out. A council of pirates, tired of dodging the red and white ensign, voted in a coup so swift that Hornigold barely had time to lash his coat to the deck. Teach, buoyed by a loyal cadre of sharpshooters and grizzled seamen, was elected captain of a newly captured sloop. The split wasn't merely personal. It mirrored a larger schism among sea rovers. Some clung to ember-bright memories of crown and country. Others seized upon the limitless freedom of predation without flags. Once installed in command, Teach struck his first grand blow off the coast of St. Vincent in November 1717, intercepting La Concorde, a French slaver out of Nantes. The vessel, packed with 455 terrified souls bound for the horrors of the Middle Passage, bore more wealth in human flesh than gold. In a decision both chilling and ironic, Teach offloaded the majority of captives onto Martinique shores. No trace of compassion, only leverage. A desperate gesture that won favour among French planters hungry for free labour. He retained just 61 enslaved Africans to muscle his ships and refit La Concorde into something worthy of his legend. A 40-gun, floating behemoth christened Queen Anne's Revenge, an oblique tribute to the monarch whose wars had given him purpose. Strengthened hull, swivel cannon lining the rails, reinforced decks. This vessel became the heart of his nascent armada. By early 1718, Teach's pirate republic boasted 4 ships and some 300 hardened men. They prowled the Windward Passage, stalking merchantmen bound for the American seaboard, where colonial trade flourished under Britain's navigation acts. Virginia tobacco, Jamaican sugar, and Pennsylvania wheat funneled through English ports enriched merchants, but inflated prices for common folk. Smugglers and pirates exploited every crack. Coastal planters traded discreetly in Spanish grog, and frontier farmers received weapons in exchange for furs, all under the watchful eye of Teach's lookouts. He once captured the Great Allen off Philadelphia, reputed to carry cargo so rich it bulged the ship's hull. Rather than sink her, Teach stripped the hold of barrels, chests, and casks. Then, in an almost magnanimous flourish, released the crew with a promise: "Tell your friends how kindly we let you go, and let no Royal Navy think to catch us unawares." Discipline aboard Teach's flagships was ironic in its strictness. Gamblers risked marooning. Lights were snuffed by 8 bell to conserve precious candle tallow. Desertion merited 40 lashes or a one-way voyage to a deserted quay. In this inverted world, such severity preserved order far better than any admiral's edicts back in England. His code, codified in pirates' articles, guaranteed equal share of treasure, save the captain's and quartermaster's double portion, and provided for compensation should misfortune strike a man's limbs or eyesight. In a perverse sense, these rules outshone the iron discipline of the Royal Navy, where death by flogging often awaited the faintest infraction. Yet it was Teach's campfire theatre that etched his name into maritime legend. Contemporary pamphlets, broadsheets hawked at dockside taverns from Boston to Bristol, relayed tales of a hulking figure who routinely ate 2 pounds of beef at dinner, washed it down with a bottle of bourbon, and then serenely went about his business. At one infamous supper aboard Queen Anne's Revenge, he allegedly fired pistols through the table to remind drunken guests of their place and of doom's nearness. Whether told by Captain Charles Johnson in his 1724 A General History of the Pirates, likely ghost-written by Daniel Defoe, or whispered by quaking tavern-keepers, these stories fused into a potent myth. Blackbeard, the living devil of the seas, a man as comfortable interrogating captives as negotiating vote tallies among his crew. Underneath the spectacle lay a shrewd understanding of psychological warfare. A peerless showman, Teach recognized that rumor could be as devastating as a broadside. He cultivated a persona that mocked the emerging Enlightenment mania for rational discourse. While philosophers in London salons debated Hobbes and Locke, Teach proved that perception alone could bend wills and treasure fleets alike. His crew reflected the Atlantic's human mosaic: English and Scots, Huguenots fleeing religious strife, escaped slaves seeking refuge from plantations, and even disenchanted Spaniards who found more fairness under pirate law than under the Spanish crown. Shipboard, racial barriers blurred, albeit hierarchies persisted, but freedom at sea, however harsh, shone brighter than bondage on shore. As 1718 dawned, Europe's rivalries reignited with the War of the Quadruple Alliance, diverting British naval power toward Mediterranean waters and leaving the Caribbean's policing in the hands of underprovided governors. Into this vacuum sailed Woodes Rogers, a one-time privateer dispatched to Nassau, bearing pardons under the Act of Grace, an olive branch extended to pirates willing to swap sea chests for ploughshares. Hornigold, perhaps weary of waiting for the next French galleon, or perhaps mindful of advancing age, accepted the pardon and turned pirate hunter, betraying comrades who once cheered his name in the taverns. Teach, by contrast, spat upon the document. He and his flotilla slipped northward, a living rebuke to colonial order and the fragile tendrils of imperial control. In those months, with the Queen Anne's Revenge cutting ghostly shapes through dawn mist, Teach's beard cast its iron shadow over Caribbean waters and far beyond. He stalked Carolina's inlets, held Charleston hostage for a cool 40-odd thousand pieces of eight, and parlayed terms that confirmed his reputation as both gentleman and tyrant. Rumours swirled of parades of hostages through town squares, of hostages drinking port with the storied pirate at the governor's expense, and of lavish entertainments funded by stolen Spanish gold. Each act of audacity built the legend, a single captain defying an empire by melding tyranny with democracy, cruelty with camaraderie, danger with dark humour. Thus, as the sun set on 1718, the sea roiled with stories of Blackbeard's dark comedy of terror. The beard had awakened into an icon of maritime rebellion, stretching its shadow from Nassau's crooked docks to the fledgling ports of the American colonies. And in that lengthening dusk, as merchantmen lit lanterns against the night, each captain whispered a prayer, or a vow, that their next sighting would not end with the dreaded name echoing across their quarterdeck. For in Teach, the world met a new sort of monster, one whose weapon was not merely the cannon's roar, but the potent alchemy of dread, democracy, and a devilish grin curled beneath a flaming beard. Part 3. Tides of Terror. Major Raids and the Charleston Blockade. Charleston in May of 1718 bloomed like a peacock strutting into a lion's den. Its cobblestone streets gleamed with fresh mortar, and its buildings wore slick coats of new paint. Local merchants bulged with rice and indigo profits. The city fathers, powdered wigs perched like startled owls, patrolled lantern-lit council halls with the swagger of newly minted aristocrats. On the low horizon, however, a very different strut approached. Edward Blackbeard, Teach's motley flotilla, sailed 3 vessels deep, led by the Queen Anne's Revenge, a floating mausoleum. When that hulking flagship drifted past Fort Johnson's rust-caked cannon, iron spikes held together only by barnacles and bravado, Charleston lost a few of its peacock feathers. The moment the blockade began, the colonists discovered how brittle their bravado really was. Blackbeard's arrival was pure theatre. A tangled crown of hair bristled with slow-burning fuses. His ember-bright eyes unsettled every onlooker. His grin was so wide and jagged, it seemed half his teeth belonged to other men. A single horn blast across the harbour bar delivered his message. Bring medicines and gold of substantial value, or watch rice-laden ships go up in flames and colonial pride drown in the harbour. No one dared reply. The local militia merely exchanged exasperated glances, shrugged, and ordered extra rum. Cumberland's finest might lack battle skill, but they knew the comforts of liquor. Behind the scenes, Governor Robert Johnson made an ungainly spectacle of himself. He paced the council chamber like an over-caffeinated pigeon, begging for troops, urgent reinforcements, even miracles from the Almighty. All in vain. The Royal Navy was off chasing phantom Spanish galleys in the Mediterranean, leaving Carolina as defenseless as a roasted pig on a spit. Blackbeard's scheme was not random bloodlust, but bureaucratic extortion delivered with the flair of a carnival barker and the menace of a cartel boss. Over the next week, Teach's pirates turned Charleston's approach into a private market. 12 merchant ships fell prey, including the richly laden Crowley, whose manifest boasted merchants, councilmen, and even plantation mistresses. The seized passengers were quartered aboard the Revenge and treated to Blackbeard's brand of hospitality. No chains, only the promise that disobedience meant a noose. Medicine chests vanished from the holds, gold chests leaked faster than rotting vats. The guarantee of safe passage held only once the ransom was paid. Apart from bruised egos, the only casualties were barrels of muscovado sugar ruined by splintered hulls and seawater. At dusk, Blackbeard stood on deck with a rum-laced pipe, sometimes sprinkled with gunpowder for flair, surveying his departing prizes like a general admiring conquering legions. He toasted the horizon in mock salute as the captured vessels drifted back to port like defeated bulls limping from the arena. Charleston was too shell-shocked to welcome them. The memory of that week's work, however, would haunt its taverns for months, spawning jokes that a slave uprising would be preferable to another pirate tea party. Far beyond Charleston's palmetto-lined streets, the Caribbean churned with imperial rivalry. Anglo-Spanish tensions simmered since the War of the Quadruple Alliance, and Britain's Asiento monopoly, charged with supplying enslaved Africans to Spanish colonies, creaked under smuggling and cutthroat ingenuity. Blackbeard exploited this fraught landscape with sharp insight. When he intercepted a Spanish slaving schooner near the Caymans, he spared the captives outright cruelty. Instead, he gave them meager provisions and a share of the cargo. This tactical mercy sowed fear among plantation owners, who changed their locks at every rumor of merciful piracy. A month earlier, off the Tenerife Islands, Teach had seized the Protestant Caesar, a logwood sloop laden with valuable timber for Europe's fashion houses. Its captain's refusal to comply provoked Teach to torch the vessel after offloading its stores. The crew was set free with strict orders to spread word of the fate awaiting any who defied pirate authority again, barnacles feeding the fish beyond the surf. That blend of theatrical flair and ruthless efficiency branded Blackbeard's legend into every merchant's mind. Medicine chests became a safer investment than a hangman's noose. Back in Charleston, Governor Johnson capitulated on May 24th with brutal pragmatism. Hostages, merchants for nurse bottles and tinctures, council members for barrels of sherry and brittle sea biscuits, shuttled across the harbour until the ransom chest was crammed with enough coins to satisfy the most rapacious privateer. Pirate crews rifled cabins for silver and fine china. Even Bibles ended up lining Blackbeard's cabin bulkhead. Red-faced but practical, Johnson told his assembly it was wiser to empty the treasury than watch half the town drown in ash and salt water. On June 1st, Teach's ship slipped away with sails bellying like exhausted whales. The city buzzed with gossip. Whispers spread of hidden coves full of treasure, rumors of female pirate officers enforcing order by pistol or bedchamber, and tales involving the governor's niece, true or drunken fantasy. Taverns from Market Street to Albemarle Row devoured these stories with morbid delight. Meanwhile, Governor Alexander Spotswood of Virginia abandoned all restraint. Tales of black flags and burning sloops spurred him to raise a ragtag militia called the Knights of Virginia. Displaced soldiers, indebted servants, and over-armed gentlemen marched off to hunt pirates, or so the official letters claimed. In dispatches to Whitehall, Spotswood inflated Blackbeard's force to 24 ships and 1,000 armed men, hinting at infernal collusion. London ministers blinked at the figures, approved fresh funds, and doubtless pocketed a share. Back home, psalm-singing preachers warned that Teach's next target might be Jamestown, with burgesses impaled on the bowsprit for all to see. Off Topsail Inlet, Blackbeard deliberately grounded the Queen Anne's Revenge. Some say to avoid a naval cutter's boarding party. He and his men rowed ashore at Beaufort Inlet, scuttled the ship at high tide, and held a salvage bazaar. They liberated Swedish iron cannon, Belgian wine, French fuses, and other contraband. On the half-sunken deck, Teach held open-air courts to settle disputes over shares. Tiny verdicts were delivered swiftly, fines paid in oysters, sentences passed with the same flourish as Blackbeard's sabre. The crew roared at each farcical trial as the tide lapped around their knees. Stripped to a lean flotilla, Teach then drifted northward, harassing coastal shipping along the Outer Banks. Fishing skiffs and pleasure yachts became easy prey for petty tyranny. Each boarding came with demands ranging from pigeon pies to tremulous shanty performances by captives. Ledgers were torched on the spot. Captured accountants carved their names on cabin beams and left with nothing but soot and a dread that future tallies would bear Blackbeard's signature. Innuendo rode piggyback on every account of Teacher's career. Rumours spoke of female officers, escaped servants and tavern wenches armed with pistols and brazen ambition, who maintained discipline and bawdier gossip claimed provided moral support to coerced merchants. Stories grew wilder, candlelit assignations on the quarterdeck, bawdy limericks at dawn, private chambers in Bath and Barbados marked by lurid warnings. Whether fact or clever publicity, London gazettes devoured these scandals, turning Blackbeard into a household name for lurid amusement. All the while, the great European powers remained stretched thin. Colonial assemblies begged for convoy escorts. Merchants courted naval captains like suitors seeking a dowry. The Board of Trade sent endless edicts, but no gunboats. Ministers bickered with Spain over treaties, leaving pirates like Teach to plunder the empire's gaps. For every gilt-buttoned merchant whose ledger was bled white, Blackbeard fanned the flames of fear faster than any broadside. In late June, off the Capes of Delaware, his terror reached a crescendo. He intercepted the sloop Betty and staged a mock trial on deck, complete with a jar of guilty rum and a pretend gibbet. A single pistol crack triggered panic until the ruse was revealed. The crew's laughter echoed across the waves. Their captain later reported that the only lasting injury was to their nerves. Back home, a preacher's wig nearly caught fire from a sputtering candle as Blackbeard's infamy spread through Atlantic gossip networks. When the smoke finally cleared, Charleston and its sister colonies bore the scars of Teach's campaign. Plantation owners refitted shutters and boarded windows. Militia captains scrawled prayers on their muskets. Society ladies embroidered "God Save Georgia" into every linen they could find. Virginia offered bounties large enough to provoke family feuds. Pennsylvania issued impassioned pleas for colonial unity. North Carolina, where rumors of Governor Charles Eden's complicity persisted, drowned its sorrows in indifferent grog. All agreed. The pirate blockade and raids had stripped away the veneer of imperial security, exposing a vulnerable underbelly to every cutthroat on the waves. By late summer, Blackbeard's reputation towered over his actual might. His fleet, whittled by desertions, pardons and wear, limped toward Ocracoke Island, sand and marsh destined to host the next act. Awaiting him there was Lieutenant Robert Maynard, eager to turn pirate lore into an epitaph. But that finale belongs to the next chapter. For now, the tides of terror had receded, leaving behind charred timbers, rattled councils. Blackbeard's reign would prove not a mere footnote in criminal annals, but a grand farce of empire, part menace, part madcap spectacle, wholly unforgettable. Part 4. Code of the Deep, Life at Sea and Pirate Brotherhood. Life aboard Edward Blackbeard Teacher's adventure, or whatever sloop, brigantine or stolen merchantman he'd pinched that week, was less mutiny waiting to happen, and more drunken anarchy with paperwork. Picture a floating commune where everyone's read Locke but would rather gut a Spanish prize than write a treatise. All men are created equal, the articles declared, meaning everyone got the same rusty cutlass and half a ration of rum, unless you filched from the pot, in which case you woke up naked on a reef with nothing but starfish for company. Blackbeard's crew was a delightful ragtag of war-weary veterans, naval deserters still twitchy at drumbeats, and opportunists who smelled gold where merchants smelled taxes. These rogues signed on under a contract, often literally inked in blood, laying out shares, sores, and sore losers, binding chaos into a damned pragmatic bureaucracy. When colonial assemblies back home squabbled over representation like pious theologians, pirates hammered out their own irreverent "We the Cutthroat Crew" on rum-sticky tables, forging survival in a world where the sea gave zero shits about declarations of rights. Blackbeard, a man who looked like Satan in a braided beard, elevated these shenanigans to art. His personal code, an oral extension of the written documents, was enforced at pistol point, or by tying offenders to the mast until they begged forgiveness. He demanded 2 shares of loot for captaincy, as did the quartermaster, because Teach loved democracy so long as he was the dem. Surgeons got 1.5 shares to amputate limbs and dab mercury on venereal catastrophes caused by portside orgies. The rest split evenly, no prize hoarding by aristocratic admirals here. Want to be captain? Win an election or swagger your way through 3 engagements, act like a coward or greedy bastard, and you got voted out faster than last night's rancid pork. In this floating, jerry-rigged republic, Voltaire's barbs at divine right monarchy finally found a seaworthy audience. Pirates sneered at kings, but happily thumbed their noses at governors when convenient. The roots of this code stretched back to buccaneers of the 1650s, who, under letters of marque from governors like Jamaica's Henry Morgan, pillaged the Spanish Main. By Teach's time, those loose commissions had mutated into written articles: "No gambling aboard," or "We'll keel-haul your sorry ass to keep the peace," "Lights out by 8," candle rationing, mind you, and Sabbatarian respites for musicians. God help you if you plucked a fiddle on Sunday, unless it was to serenade a governor at Ocracoke. They even fined pirates who showed up late to muster, a cruel parody of military discipline. Yet none of these rules stopped Blackbeard from smoking his pipe in defiance, blood-red beard braids hanging with slow-burning fuses. Half intimidation, half vanity. Daily life aboard was a test of endurance, wit, and bowel control. The adventure, likely a 10-gun sloop around 80 tons, felt like sardines in a sea chest. 70 men crammed into hammocks, slung cheek by jowl in the hold. The air could choke a bilge rat. Sweat, tar and bilge stank, formed a noxious bouquet that no amount of grog could mask, though God knows they tried. Provisions came from captured prizes: salted pork that could crack a tooth, hardtack that doubled as weaponry, and the occasional fresh turtle filched from Caribbean coves. Scurvy, the vitamin C-starved bastard, prompted furious scavenging for citrus fruits, leading to midnight raids on unsuspecting guava groves. Water turned foul in days, so rum mixed with brackish swill, and a lime if someone remembered, to become grog. Admiral Vernon might have formalized the lime ration in 1740, but pirates had been improvising since the first parched lip complained. The ship's surgeon, often pressed from a captured brig, wielded saws for amputations and rubbed mercury on groin infections that would make a monk blush. Venereal disease was basically the ship's mascot. Yet for all the brutality, pirates coveted self-sufficiency. Planters in Barbados petitioned the Crown for escorts to shield sugar convoys, while Blackbeard's crew swaggered in with stolen medicines, jury-rigged distilleries, and a cunning eye for smuggling. The code forbade striking a shipmate aboard, unless you wanted to be slapped in irons, but onshore duels settled scores. Steal from the common chest? You got marooned on the nearest desolate quay, left to argue philosophy with crabs until starvation or rescue. Worse than hanging, they said, mainly because if you lived, you'd envy the gallows. The Brotherhood's diversity was its secret weapon. English tars from the War of Jenkins' Ear rubbed shoulders with French Huguenots fleeing Louis's Inquisition. Scots, scarred by the 1707 Union Acts, grumbled alongside African sailors, some free, some recently liberated, like Black Caesar, whose legend grew with every ale-soaked tavern retelling. Dutch pilots taught dead reckoning, naval deserters schooled gunnery, polyglot tongues interrogated Spanish and Portuguese prizes. This floating melting pot ran counter to the plantation's rigid racial caste, though it had its hypocrisies. African crewmen enjoyed relative grudging respect, so long as they weren't recaptured and sold back into bondage. The code's egalitarianism stopped short at chattel markets, but aboard Teach's vessel, an escaped slave could earn equal shares, spar with the best, and even aspire to command, provided he didn't run afoul of someone's sugar plantation connections ashore. Women, thanks to prudish articles like Roberts's, were usually barred to avoid jealousies and messy pregnancies. Yet Mary Red and Anne Bonny snuck aboard under breeches and buckled belts, sword-fighting and swilling rum alongside the boys until discovered. Teach's own taste in wenches is the stuff of bawdy legend. Sailors swore he once hosted a midnight salad hour in Ocracoke where rum flowed, clothes flew, and the pickings of local farms vanished. Corn, chickens, morals, you name it. Pirate governance was a delicate, drunken ballet. Quartermasters like Israel Hands were elected to distribute loot, arbitrate disputes, and slap down a captain's overreach. Teach's penchant for theatrical tyranny included dinner-table theatrics. He'd fire pistols beneath tables to liven the mood, sending shivered bone chairs skittering across the deck. No one died, usually, but everyone remembered who held the powder horn. Such rude spectacles affirmed psychological dominance. If you can scare me at supper, you can scare me in battle. Still, when the quartermaster felt Teach was hoarding prizes, or showing too much affection for his own share, the crew held votes. Whispered accusations of favoritism, of blowing up items of exotic lace just to keep the pretty ladies to yourself, could see even Blackbeard face a motion of no confidence. Spoiler, no one voted the bastard out, but threats of scuttling and sabotage made for entertaining council meetings. Pirates no prey, no pay mantra drove both courage and boredom. Idle weeks in the gentle Gulf currents bred cabin fever. Raucous drinking sessions led governors like North Carolina's Charles Eden to cozy up to pirates. Eden's Ocracoke sanctuary lurked among marshy inlets where the law might swing a lantern, but never quite hit its target. Rumor had it he received clandestine bales of Spanish silver in exchange for safe harbor. Teach's visits to Eden were part drunken soiree, part bribery summit, lawless enterprise leaning on cordial nods above cordial cups. Yet for all the cheer and grog-fueled revelries, whispers of betrayal stirred at the fringe of the Brotherhood. The 1718 Act for the more effectual suppression of piracy dangled pardons like sweet candies in a brothel. Accept the king's mercy, testify against your mates, and you got to keep your skin, if not your honor. Many sailors, tired of the blood, took the deal, then turned informant in exchange for passage or plantations. The ultimate betrayal, those who'd pledged axes and oaths now clung to royal pardons like lust-crazed wenches. Blackbeard countered by recruiting only battle-hardened miscreants who'd rather face the gallows than spend a day kissing a king's arse. The code functioned as an upside-down corporate charter. The East India Company chartered ships for tea and opium. Pirates chartered ships for terror and plunder. A joint stock venture where dividends meant Spanish doubloons, not silks. Each man marched into battle expecting equal reward, unless you brought a healing salve for syphilis, in which case you enjoyed surgeon's privileges. Booty divisions happened on deck at dawn, each pirate claiming silks, spices, or slaves according to article clauses. Slaves often horrifically commodified, sold off at the nearest port, or pressed into new service. Yet odd egalitarianism persisted. A powder monkey, who distinguished himself, might rise to boatswain or even lieutenant, a social mobility unheard of ashore. Enter Ocracoke's deceptive calm, the scene of Brotherhood's fraying edges. Teach, eye-patched and coiffed with unlit fuses, paraded his top brass to carbines and casks. Under insulated pines, ambition stalked like a reef. Younger captains bristled at Teach's theatrical bluster. Quartermasters whispered about dividing the fleet, seizing the treasure map, forging independent alliances. Meanwhile, women, some strayed aboard, gossiped of new commandments, secret pacts with Governor Eden, and promises of pardons. The code's chain of command rattled in a salt of silence. Who would betray whom first? Would hands cut a deal? Would Eden's promised papers arrive? Tensions crackled louder than black powder. Then came the morning raid that sealed it all. Royal Navy sloops, summoned by tip-offs, drifted into Pamlico Sound like steel sharks. Teach's reception was predictably dramatic. He strapped lit fuses into his beard, issued fiery proclamations about burning England's navy to cinders, and, legend says, delivered his last toast to Bacchus in a roar of cannon smoke. The code dissolved in cannonade, vote or no vote. No one had time for articles when grape shot and musket balls shattered harmony. Brotherhood cracked under fire. Those pockets of code that had bound them, elected officers, strict articles, camaraderie, snapped like brittle rope in the storm. Blackbeard fell at last, a figure half myth, half legend, cut down by Lieutenant Maynard's party ashore, gasping curses and blood, beard still smoking, dying like the world's rowdiest reveller, refusing a last drink. The Brotherhood dispersed, some marooned, some hanged, a few who took the king's pardon and scurried onto plantations, wealth in pockets and shame in their hearts. Thus ended the code of the deep, equal shares of loot, lashings for thieves, and democratic elections aboard a ship named for plunder. For a time, pirates mocked sovereigns and lit their beards aflame in candlelit feasts. They embodied a twisted echo of Enlightenment ideals, liberty and contract, inverted for high seas robbery. Yet in the end, the sea's indifference, royal warships, and internal rot toppled the grand experiment. The Brotherhood splintered, but its legend lived on, a bawdy, blood-soaked testament to what happens when men cherish freedom, grog and gold, and apply a little Locke-inspired ink to chaos. Part 5. Eternal Waves. Downfall, Death, and Lasting Legend. Ocracoke, in November, 1718 felt like nature's practical joke, a glass-calm sea that whispered slick sailing ahead, hiding shallow sandbars and half-drowned wrecks like punchlines waiting for an unsuspecting audience. Perfect stage for Edward Teach's final act, a swaggering pirate captain who preferred rum over reason, pistol over parley, and kept slow-burning fuses twisted into his beard to look as if hell itself had hitchhiked aboard his ship. If Teach had been scripting his own spectacular demise, he probably would have staged a dramatic cannonade against a Spanish treasure fleet, with enough fireballs to light up the Caribbean for days. Instead, the universe, ever the sneering director, pitched him against a sober Virginia lieutenant in a dank backwater skirmish, better described as a pub brawl gone wrong. Legends, it turns out, don't always exit stage left in fireworks. Sometimes they slip on a muddy shoal and faceplant. By late 1718, the imperial machine was cranking down on freebooters. Britain's Board of Trade had grown tired of lost customs duties and angry merchants crusading for justice. Pirates had once been tolerated, useful blunt instruments against enemy commerce, but now they were liabilities. Alexander Spotswood, Virginia's lieutenant governor, smelled both profit and glory in putting Teach's head on a spike. Fresh from beating the Tuscarora rebellion into submission, he saw piracy as the mortal threat to Virginia's tobacco exports, over £20 million a year by 1720, and to his own legacy. When London dragged its feet, Spotswood greased palms and borrowed coin, funding his own anti-pirate expeditions and stirring moral panic back home with sermons trumpeting enemies to all mankind. Under the 1700 Piracy Act, pirates were legally worse than jaywalkers. No jury trials, straight to Admiralty Court and the gallows. Across the border in North Carolina, Governor Charles Eden was playing a different game, one that involved a fair bit of rum and blind eyes. Eden's sparsely populated colony needed any economic boost it could get. Smuggled French brandy, stolen Spanish pieces of eight, and taxpayers willing to turn a profit from black market auctions in Bathtown. Teach luxuriated there like a guest of honor, bedding local wenches and swapping outrageous sea shanties for Eden's questionable letters of marque that were as genuine as a toddler's artwork. Spotswood, furious at this cosy deal, figured the best way to teach Eden a lesson was to kidnap his favourite pirate. Thus, Lieutenant Robert Maynard, wooden jaw, stiff upper lip, and zero tolerance for rogue captains, set out commanding 2 sloops, Jane and Ranger, with a quid pro quo dangling over every seaman's head. £100 for Teacher's noggin. That was real money then, enough to buy a small island or at least a hefty keg of rum. Maynard and his men sneaked through Ocracoke's maze at high tide, hunkered below decks to make Jane seem deserted, and floated along like scared fish. Cue the grand prank, painted as an abandoned hulk, Jane lured Teacher's pride and joy, the adventure, within pistol range. On the grey morning of November 22nd, snow fell on the water, actually ash from nearby sawmills, but it looked spooky enough. Teach, half drunk on rum and half curious about this deserted ship, ordered his 25-man crew aboard to plunder the prize. They swaggered up ramps and crossed grapnels, cutlasses drawn, expecting a quick haul. Instead, they found Maynard's Marines, scarlet uniforms and all, rolling out of hidden berths like well-trained rats. What followed was less a glorious naval engagement and more a filthy, sweaty bar fight. Gunpowder smoke blurred faces, grappling hooks snagged coats. Teach himself leapt into the fray, screaming, waving pistols and slashing with his blade. 5 musket balls and 20 sword cuts later, the pirate was a patchwork of gore, yet he fought on until he sank beneath the boards. When Maynard finally overcame him, he chopped off Teach's head to claim the bounty and lashed it to his bowsprit, a grisly pirate trophy that swayed in mock salute to every passing ship. He also snatched the scalp locks, beard included, so Spotswood could show King George a souvenir of colonial efficiency. Eden cried foul, accusing Virginia of jurisdictional cowboy antics, foreshadowing the intercolonial spats that would simmer until 1776. But for the moment, Spotswood got his prize. Tobacco merchants could breathe easier, the Board of Trade ate crow, and Maynard rubbed his hands over a pocketful of pound notes and self-congratulatory reports. Back on shore, Admiralty courts were busy. From 1719 to 1722, Boston and London hanged dozens of pirates, their bodies gibbeted like road signs warning sailors, "Don't fuck with England's ships." The park benches and pubs swelled with bawdy ballads about Blackbeard's final stand, lyrics that grew wilder with every pint. Some songs claimed his skull barked curses at intruders. Others swore he had an army of zombie corsairs patrolling the inlet at night. Meanwhile, the wreck of Queen Anne's Revenge, Teach's flagship lost at Beaufort Inlet in 1718, lay buried until 1996, when archaeologists popped up cannons of all types, a medical syringe here, slave shackles there, and half-eaten rum-soaked biscuits. Over 250,000 artifacts emerged, pewter plates stamped with noble crests, gold dust flung about like pixie poop, African beads hinting at Teach's participation in the slave trade. Taken together, they sketched a portrait not just of a fearsome pirate, but of a crew that feasted on half-stolen gourmet food, bribed locals for intel, and mixed European finery with Akan gold weights, piracy as a twisted form of early globalization. Between fights and sea storms, Teach's private life was one for leering balladeers. He supposedly married 14 wives, many of whom he divorced or deserted with a curt, "I'm off to loot another galleon." He once allegedly executed a subordinate for stealing a handful of coins, then ordered the cook to batter the man's head like mutton, so the crew would know thievery was for goody two-shoes, not cutthroats. Whether any of that is true is debatable. Charles Johnson's A General History of the Pirates, 1724, embroidered everything with enough hyperbole to shame a tabloid. Some suspect Johnson was Daniel Defoe in disguise, sharpening the legend to flog his own book. But readers lapped it up, hungry for tales of 9-foot-tall brutes, mermaids, and buried treasure. The public ate it like salty nuts at a carnival, yet scratch beneath the legend and you find Teach was more showman than sadist. He preferred to bluff his way into surrender, hoisting a black flag with winged skeletons and hourglasses, shouting promises of slaughter unless ships surrendered precious cargo. More often than not, the merchantmen yielded after a few thunderous broadsides, spilling tea, silk, and sometimes married passengers who couldn't keep their chemises on shore leave. Teach got a dozen bimbos one night, juggled them on deck, and sent them ashore with dancing tunes. A chest of chests and a bed of young mistresses. Why bother with a fight? But by 1718, Britain had had enough. The South Sea bubble burst in 1720, revealing debts as bloated as a porker in August, and investors demanded protected sea lanes. Naval squadrons ramped up patrols under commodores like Francis Hosier, who didn't give two shits for pirate codes. The Transportation Act of 1721 shipped convicts to the colonies, proving that empires would rather export their undesirables than tolerate marauding entrepreneurs, whether just a bastard with a blade or a poor soul pressed into service. Yet Blackbeard survived the cutlasses of time. From Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island to Disney's summertime theme park thrill rides, Teach's myth metastasized into pop culture currency. A ghost in the fog, a cursed skull in a chest, a swashbuckler who grunted at the drop of a hat. Modern, authentic pirate outfits with tricorn hats, eye patches, and rubber parrots owe more to Johnson's imagination than any 18th century deckhand. And why not? It's more fun to picture him with a maniacal grin, cheeks smeared with gunpowder, smoking a pipe stuffed in his ruddy beard, than to reckon with the fact he delivered Africans into bondage and left a trail of corpses in his wake. Archaeology keeps chipping away at the man behind the myth. The Queen Anne's revenge dig site off Beaufort has turned up smallpox-scarred teeth, intricate French wine goblets, and even a few French grenades that never blew because someone forgot to prime them. Divers swear they've heard whispers at low tide, as if Teach's spirit mutters or snickers under the waves. But the real afterlife he enjoys is in ledger books and dusty court transcripts, where his headstones line up with names of lesser pirates, Benjamin Hornigold, Charles Vane, Stade de Bonnet, each a footnote to the Golden Age's demise. So here's the final irony. Edward Teach, the dread pirate who swaggered into history, blowing smoke from his beard and fire from his mouth, rests in unmarked waters off Ocracoke. His severed head, once a shudder-inducing warning, rotted down to nothing. No marble slab, no metal plaque, just a silent seabed. Empires last not on legend or violence, but on the humdrum permanence of laws, trade records, and insurance ledgers. Blackbeard's saga, bawdy, brutal, and breathtaking, reminds us that ambition can lift a scrawny Bristol boy onto a gilded throne of fear, but only reality can pull him back under. In the end, he's just another driftwood story floating at the empire's edge, a testament to how lust for adventure can ripple across oceans, and how all ripples eventually settle into the sand. The Golden Age of Piracy, Part 1, Introduction. In the lawless waters of the 17th and 18th centuries, a band of outlaws ruled the seas, not with crowns and scepters, but with cutlasses, cannons, and unyielding cunning. Picture this: a merchant vessel laden with Spanish gold, sails billowing under a blood-red sunset, suddenly spotting a black-sailed predator on the horizon. The crew scrambles in panic as the pirate ship closes in, its deck alive with whooping buccaneers, ready to claim their prize. The air fills with the crack of muskets and the roar of cannons as grappling hooks fly across the narrowing gap, pulling the worlds of order and chaos into deadly collision. This wasn't just plunder, it was defiance against empires, a fleeting era of freedom on the high seas where the weak became mighty and the mighty trembled. But who were these pirates? Were they the bloodthirsty villains of tavern tales, swigging rum and burying treasure under palm trees, or misunderstood rebels fighting a rigged world of exploitation and tyranny? And why did their golden age ignite like a powder keg, only to fizzle out in chains, gallows, and forgotten graves scattered across distant shores? To truly understand this explosive period, we need to immerse ourselves in the grit and glory that defined it. Today, we're diving deep into the Golden Age of Piracy, the most notorious chapter in maritime history, a time when the oceans were battlegrounds for fortune and fate. From the sun-baked quays of the Caribbean, where turquoise waters hid coral reefs that claimed as many ships as the pirates themselves, to the spice-laden routes of the Indian Ocean, where monsoon winds carried the scent of exotic cargoes ripe for the taking, these rogue sailors captured imaginations then and now. They weren't just thieves. They were disruptors who forced kings and merchants to redraw maps and rethink their empires. We'll uncover the chaos that birthed them, exploring the economic winds and political storms that set the stage. We'll meet the legends who defined them, the flamboyant captains whose names still echo in songs and stories. We'll delve into the brutal realities of their lives at sea, from the camaraderie of the quarterdeck to the horrors of tropical fevers, and we'll peel back the myths that still haunt us, separating the Hollywood spectacle from the harsh truths. Buckle up, mateys. This is no child's fairy tale of parrots and peg legs. It's the raw, unfiltered story of pirates who turned the world upside down, or at least tried to, in a blaze of gunpowder and greed. Before we hoist the sails, let's define what we mean by the Golden Age. Historians peg it roughly from the 1650s to the 1730s, a time when piracy exploded in scale and audacity, transforming from sporadic raids into a semi-organized scourge that threatened global commerce. It wasn't a single unbroken spree, but a series of waves, each building on the last, like swells in a gathering gale. The early phase, from 1650 to 1680, was the buccaneering era. Think rugged hunters preying on Spanish galleons, sanctioned at first by English and French crowns as privateers during their endless wars. These were the wild frontiersmen of the sea, leather-skinned adventurers who started as cattle hunters on lawless islands like Hispaniola and Tortuga, but quickly graduated to boarding parties and blazing broadsides. Bases like Jamaica's Port Royal served as rowdy outposts, a melting pot of sailors, smugglers, and strumpets, where the line between legal privateering and outright piracy blurred like smoke from a cannon. Then came the pirate round in the 1690s, a daring expansion when opportunists sailed east to the Indian Ocean, hitting Mughal treasure ships and East India Company merchants for hauls that could make a king weep. Led by figures like Henry Every, who vanished with a fortune after capturing the Ganges Sawai in 1695, this phase turned piracy into an international enterprise, with Madagascar emerging as a pirate paradise of fortified harbours and divided spoils. But the true zenith, that hit after the War of the Spanish Succession wrapped in 1714, unleashing a torrent of unemployed warriors onto an unsuspecting world. Thousands of demobilized sailors, privateers turned jobless and bitter, flooded ports from London to Boston and turned to crime with a vengeance. From 1715 to 1726, piracy peaked in a spectacular frenzy, over 5,000 pirates terrorizing the Atlantic and beyond, capturing more than 2,400 vessels in raids that crippled trade routes and sent insurance rates skyrocketing. Places like Nassau in the Bahamas became pirate utopias, lawless republics where the black flag flew higher than any monarch's banner, and crews governed themselves with articles of agreement that promised equality in plunder and peril. What made this era golden? It wasn't just the loot, though mountains of silver from Peruvian mines, silk from China, and even human cargo from the slave trade flowed into pirate coffers, funding orgies of spending that propped up fragile colonies. It was the romance of rebellion, a siren call to the disenfranchised. In a world of rigid hierarchies, where captains ruled merchant ships like tyrants and impressed sailors toiled for scraps, pirates offered a taste of democracy, equal shares of plunder, elected captains who could be voted out, no flogging without cause, and even provisions for the injured. They challenged the might of Spain, England, France, and the emerging Dutch Empire, forcing empires to rethink their naval strategies and pour fortunes into anti-piracy fleets. But beneath the glamour lurked savagery, torture to extract maps from reluctant captains, mutinies born of drunken brawls, and short, violent lives where the average pirate career lasted just 2 years before the noose, the bullet, or the shark-infested depths claimed them. Disease was a greater killer than any navy, with scurvy and flux felling more men than broadsides. In the coming tale, we'll explore the sparks that ignited this fire, the economic booms and busts that made the seas a treasure trove, the wars that unleashed idle hands to devilish deeds. We'll meet the icons, Blackbeard with his flaming beard, and psychological terror tactics, the fiery Anne Bonny, who spat in the face of gender norms, the prolific Black Bart Roberts, who captured over 400 prizes in a whirlwind of audacity. We'll relive epic battles, from the sacking of Panama in a river of fire to deadly naval showdowns, where wooden walls shattered under relentless fire. And we'll peel back the myths. No buried treasure for most, but plenty of buried bodies in unmarked island graves. Finally, we'll see how this age faded under the weight of royal wrath and why it endures in our stories today, from swashbuckling films to the very symbol of rebellion. If you're ready to hoist the sails and chase the horizon, let's set course. But remember, in the world of pirates, fortune favors the bold and the foolish. The sea is a cruel mistress, and she takes no prisoners. As these roots took hold, the first strongholds sprouted across the map. But to understand how piracy took root, we must delve deeper into the historical currents that carried it to shore. Part 2. Historical context and causes. To grasp the Golden Age, we can't just romanticize the rogues. We must sail back to the turbulent waters that birthed them, navigating the complex interplay of economics, politics, and human desperation that turned ordinary seamen into legends of the deep. The 17th century was an era of empires clashing and fortunes rising on the backs of the sea, a time when the age of exploration had ripened into the age of exploitation. European powers, Spain with its vast American colonies stretching from Mexico to Peru, England and France hungry for a slice of the pie, and the Dutch carving out their own spice empires, poured resources into transatlantic trade that reshaped the world. Spanish galleons, those behemoths of oak and iron, hauled silver from the fabled Potosi mines in Bolivia, gold from the Caribbean's hidden veins, while English merchants shipped slaves from the fevered coasts of West Africa and distilled rum from Jamaica's sugarcane fields. By the 1650s, this triangular trade was a golden goose, generating obscene wealth that fueled endless wars, opulent palaces, and the rise of mercantile classes back in Europe. But where there's treasure afloat, there's temptation, and profound vulnerability that pirates were all too eager to exploit. The trade boom and vulnerable shipping. Imagine the riches in vivid detail. A single Spanish treasure fleet, the Flota de Indias, could carry 100 tons of silver, equivalent to billions in today's dollars, along with emeralds from Colombia, indigo from Guatemala, and cochineal dye worth its weight in gold. These convoys snaked annually from Havana's fortified harbor to Seville, guarded by warships but still prey to the whims of nature and man. They weren't invincible fortresses, far from it. Storms in the Atlantic scattered formations like chaff in the wind, coral reefs off Florida and the Bahamas claimed hulls with ruthless efficiency, and enterprising raiders lay in wait, like wolves among sheep. The Caribbean became a pirate's playground par excellence because shipping lanes hugged island chains for protection, creating natural choke points like the treacherous windward passage between Cuba and Hispaniola, or the narrow channels around Jamaica where ambush was child's play. Spain's dominance, once unchallenged after Columbus's voyages, had waned dramatically after humiliating defeats like the 1588 Armada, when English fireships turned the vaunted Invincible Armada into floating infernos. This left gaping holes in patrols, inviting interlopers from rival nations. English buccaneers, so named for their origins as boucaniers who smoked wild cattle on Hispaniola for hides and jerky, found a perfect base after Oliver Cromwell's Western design captured Jamaica from Spain in 1655. What started as opportunistic hunts for stray galleons, slaughtering herds on the Spanish Main for provisions, quickly escalated to full-scale assaults. By the 1660s, these buccaneers had organized into flotillas, using Jamaica's Blue Mountains for cover and Port Royal as a launch pad. Figures like the infamous François l'Olonnais, a one-eyed Frenchman known for his sadistic flair, were torturing captured captains with flaming matches under their nails to extract navigation charts, proving that one swift sloop with a crew of 50 could overwhelm a lumbering galleon laden with cargo but light on fight. But it wasn't just raw opportunity, it was baked into the system's bones. Overloaded ships prioritized profit over protection. Merchants skimped on armaments, cannons, and trained marines to cram in more hold space for goods, leaving crews outnumbered and outgunned by agile attackers. Pirates exploited this asymmetry with speed, surprise, and sheer ferocity, often flying false colors to lure victims close before revealing the Jolly Roger. This trade boom didn't just lure pirates from afar, it created them from within. Disgruntled sailors, pressed into service on rotten, rat-infested hulks with meager pay and brutal discipline, floggings for spilling a rope's end, saw piracy as not just a crime, but a promotion to autonomy. Why slave for a pittance when a single capture could net shares worth a lifetime's wages? The influx of wealth also corrupted ports, turning them into fences for stolen goods and recruiting grounds for the desperate. Post-war unemployment and privateering. Fast forward to the early 1700s, and the real powder keg ignites with a thunderous boom. The War of the Spanish Succession, 1701 to 1714, was no mere squabble. It was a global slugfest spanning continents, with England, France, Spain, and the Holy Roman Empire duking it out for thrones, colonies, and trade monopolies that controlled the flow of bullion and goods. Armies clashed on European battlefields, but the seas were the true theatre of decision. Naval engagements from Gibraltar to the Caribbean decided who would dominate the waves. Privateers, essentially legal pirates issued letters of marque by their governments, were the war's sharks, commissioned to raid enemy shipping and disrupt supply lines. These commissions turned ordinary sailors into sanctioned reivers, promising prize money from condemned vessels that could multiply a man's fortune overnight. Thousands signed on eagerly, crews swelling to 50,000 across belligerent fleets, honing skills in boarding actions, gunnery, and evasion that would later bedevil peacetime merchants. But peace in 1714, sealed by the Treaty of Utrecht, demobilized them overnight like a fleet running aground. Britain alone cut loose 36,000 sailors, veterans of battles like Vigo Bay, 1702, where English forces seized a Spanish silver convoy, many skilled in navigation and combat, but now penniless and purposeless. Ports like Bristol, Liverpool, and even Boston overflowed with idle hands. The sudden peace flooded the merchant marine with labor, plummeting wages to starvation levels and sparking riots in shipyards. Conditions aboard legitimate vessels were hellish. Captains, facing cutthroat competition, imposed harsher rations, longer watches, and corporal punishments that made naval service look lenient. What to do for these broken tradesmen of the sea? Starve in the gutter, beg in the streets, or seize the sea as their own? Benjamin Hornigold, a former Bahamian privateer, captured his first prize off Jamaica in 1713 and never looked back, mentoring a generation that included the dreaded Blackbeard. The Bahamas Nassau, abandoned by the Crown after Spanish raids in the 1680s, became an ideal haven. Its deep, sheltered harbour perfect for careening, cleaning, stolen hulls, and its isolation from prying eyes fostering a de facto pirate republic. By 1715, ex-privateers like Samuel Black Sam Bellamy were declaring in captured logbooks, "A merry life and a short one shall be my fate," a rallying cry echoing the desperation that turned letters of marque into black flags of defiance. Governments turned a blind eye at first. Cash-strapped colonies like the Carolinas and Jamaica needed the economic jolt from pirates flooding taverns with Spanish doubloons, buying supplies and services that sustained fragile economies. But as raids began hitting friendly shipping, English sugar vessels bound for London, for instance, tolerance soured into outright hostility, with governors issuing bounties and dispatching sloops of war. Colonial havens and corruption. No pirate age could thrive without safe harbours, those shadowy refuges where ships could repair, crews carouse, and loot be divvied without interference. Colonial outposts in the New World were rife with graft and neglect, a powder keg of ambition and avarice. Governors like Nicholas Laws of Jamaica pocketed handsome bribes from buccaneers like Henry Morgan, the Welsh firebrand who sacked Portobello in 1668 and later parlayed his infamy into a knighthood and lieutenant governorship. Port Royal, dubbed the wickedest city on earth by contemporaries, partied through the 1660s with brothels, gaming dens, and markets hawking plunder, until the devastating 1692 earthquake liquefied the soil, swallowing two-thirds of the town in a biblical cataclysm and shifting action to New Providence in the Bahamas. Corruption wasn't just local colour, it was systemic. European powers played both sides of the fence. England winked at pirates disrupting Spanish trade to weaken a rival, issuing backdoor pardons. France armed Tortuga's buccaneers as proxies in their colonial jockeying. Socially, piracy appealed to the utterly marginalised, offering a brutal meritocracy where skill trumped birthright. Escaped slaves from brutal plantations, comprising up to 20% of some crews, like Black Caesar on Blackbeard's ship, joined for the rare equality on land, where racial hierarchies enforced by whips and chains ruled the day. Indigenous peoples from the Americas and even captured Africans brought invaluable knowledge of winds and waters. Women like Anne Bonny, fleeing abusive Irish plantations, or Mary Read, disguised as a man from her youth, sought the relative freedom of shipboard life, though it was no paradise, with rampant disease, sodomy trials, and the constant shadow of capture. These havens weren't utopias. They were Darwinian dens where alliances shifted like tides, but they provided the crucial sanctuary for piracy to flourish. These factors, vast wealth afloat on underprotected waves, broken navies adrift in peacetime, desperate men forged in war's furnace, and complicit colonies greased by graft, converged like a perfect storm in the summer of 1715. Piracy wasn't born of innate villainy, but systemic failure. Empires built on exploitation and inequality bred their own destroyers, men who struck back with the only weapon they had, the sea itself. From these seeds, the great pirate republics would bloom, drawing adventurers from every corner of the globe. Part 3. Major regions and pirate bases. To understand the reach of the Golden Age of Piracy, we must sail across the globe to the strongholds where pirates thrived, turning sleepy harbours into bustling dens of lawlessness. The period from the 1650s to the 1730s saw piracy flourish not just as random acts of plunder, but as a semi-organised network exploiting the cracks in colonial empires. These bases were more than hideouts. They were vibrant hubs of trade, rebellion, and survival, where black flags waved defiantly against imperial banners. From the Caribbean's turquoise waters to the distant shores of Madagascar, pirates carved out territories that challenged the might of nations. Their choice of bases reflected strategic genius. Shallow harbours to evade deep-draft warships, proximity to trade routes for quick strikes, and corruptible officials to grease the wheels. Let's explore the key regions that fueled this era, focusing on the Caribbean heartland and the global outposts that extended piracy's reach. The Caribbean heartland. The Caribbean was the beating heart of the Golden Age, a sprawling archipelago of opportunity where empires clashed and pirates prospered. Its islands, Jamaica, the Bahamas, Hispaniola, and Cuba, sat astride the richest trade routes, where Spanish galleons and English merchantmen hauled silver, sugar, and slaves. Jamaica's Port Royal was the early epicenter, a boomtown dubbed the Sodom of the New World for its debauchery. By the 1660s, it was a pirate's paradise, with narrow streets packed with taverns, brothels, and merchants fencing stolen goods. Henry Morgan used it as his launchpad for raids like the 1668 sack of Portobello, where he returned with 250,000 pieces of eight, enough to buy a small fleet. Port Royal's governor, Thomas Modiford, issued privateering commissions that blurred into outright piracy, pocketing a cut of the spoils. But the 1692 earthquake, which sank two-thirds of the city into the sea, shifted the spotlight to other havens. Enter Nassau in the Bahamas, the most infamous pirate republic of the era. By 1715, New Providence Island was a near-abandoned wreck. Spanish raids had driven off British settlers, leaving a natural harbour guarded by shoals that kept naval frigates at bay. Pirates like Benjamin Hornigold and Charles Vane transformed it into a fortress of freedom, where crews repaired sloops, traded loot for rum, and elected their own leaders. By 1717, Nassau hosted over 1,000 pirates and 20 ships, a floating democracy where men like Blackbeard forged alliances. Its beaches were littered with careened hulls, and its taverns echoed with plans for raids. The Bahamas' proximity to the Florida Strait, where Spanish treasure fleets sailed, made it a perfect staging ground. Governors in nearby colonies, like Archibald Hamilton of Jamaica, often turned a blind eye, buying cheap goods from pirate hauls to resell at profit. Tortuga, off Hispaniola's northern coast, was another key base, especially during the buccaneering era, 1650 to 1680. Controlled loosely by the French, it was a rugged outpost where buccaneers, originally cattle hunters, organized raids on Spanish settlements. Its high cliffs and single navigable channel made it a natural fortress, ideal for quick escapes. By the 1670s, figures like François l'Olonnais used Tortuga to launch brutal attacks, like the 1667 raid on Maracaibo, netting plunder worth $500,000 today. The island's multicultural mix, French, English, Dutch, and runaway slaves, created a melting pot of tactics and languages, with crews united by profit rather than loyalty. These Caribbean hubs thrived because of geography and politics. Shallow waters deterred heavy warships, while colonial rivalries ensured lax enforcement. Spain's focus on protecting its treasure fleets left smaller settlements vulnerable, and English and French colonies quietly welcomed pirate goods to bolster their economies. By 1718, Nassau alone was responsible for disrupting 10% of Atlantic trade, forcing London to send naval squadrons to reclaim it. The Caribbean wasn't just a backdrop, it was the crucible where piracy's audacity was forged, a region where a single sloop could challenge an empire's might. Global expansions, Indian Ocean, Pacific, Africa. Piracy wasn't confined to the Caribbean, it was a global plague that struck wherever trade flowed. The Indian Ocean became a major theatre during the pirate round of the 1690s, as English and Dutch pirates ventured east to prey on Mughal and East India Company ships. Madagascar, off Africa's southeast coast, emerged as a pirate utopia, its harbours like St. Mary's Island offering shelter and supplies. Pirates like Henry Every used it as a base for his 1695 capture of the Ganjai Sawai, a Mughal ship carrying gold and jewels worth over $100 million today. Madagascar's isolation made it a perfect refuge, far from naval patrols, with friendly tribes trading food for trinkets. By 1700, an estimated 1,500 pirates operated there, forming semi-permanent settlements with names like Libertatia, though such utopian tales are likely exaggerated. These bases supported raids as far as the Red Sea, where pilgrim ships to Mecca were rich targets. The Pacific also saw action, particularly along Spain's American colonies. Pirates like William Dampier circumnavigated the globe, hitting Manila galleons off Mexico and Peru. These annual ships carried Chinese silks and porcelain, making them high-value targets. Dampier's 1680s raids, though less lucrative than Caribbean hauls, showed piracy's global reach, with crews enduring brutal Pacific crossings for a chance at glory. West Africa's Gold Coast was another hotspot, where pirates like Bartholomew Roberts targeted slave ships in the 1720s. The region's lack of centralized control and heavy traffic, English and Portuguese vessels carrying enslaved Africans, made it ripe for plunder. Roberts alone captured 11 slave ships off Whydah in 1722, trading captives for gold dust. These global outposts worked because they mirrored the Caribbean's advantages: strategic locations, weak governance, and rich trade routes. Madagascar's harbours were as defensible as Nassau's, and Pacific raids exploited Spain's overstretched navy. Yet, they also highlighted piracy's diversity. Crews included Africans, Indians, and even disaffected East India Company men, blending cultures in pursuit of profit. By the early 1700s, these far-flung bases connected piracy into a web that spanned oceans, challenging the idea that empires could control the seas. But as navies tightened their grip, these havens would become traps for the bold. Part 4. Key pirate figures and their stories. The Golden Age wasn't just about places, it was defined by larger-than-life figures whose names still conjure images of swagger and menace. These were no mere criminals, but complex characters, some strategic, others sadistic, all driven by ambition, desperation, or defiance. From buccaneers who blurred the line between legal and lawless to flamboyant rogues who became legends, their stories weave a tapestry of daring and doom. Let's meet the icons who hoisted the black flag highest, from the early trailblazers to the peak-era terrors, and the diverse outliers who defied convention. Early buccaneers. The Golden Age's roots lie with the buccaneers, rough-hewn privateers who turned piracy into an art form. Henry Morgan, the Welsh-born son of a farmer, was the archetype. Starting as a privateer in the 1660s, he became England's weapon against Spain, raiding Panama in 1671 with 1,400 men and 36 ships. His sack of the city, burning it to ash after looting 400,000 pieces of eight, made him a hero in London and a devil in Madrid. Morgan's genius was his adaptability. He used shallow-draft sloops to outmaneuver Spanish galleons and disciplined his crews with shares of plunder, not promises. Yet, his later years saw him knighted and appointed Lieutenant Governor of Jamaica, a pirate-turned-establishment man who hunted his former comrades. His life shows the blurry line between privateering and piracy, sanctioned one day, outlawed the next. Another early figure, Pierre Legrand, set the tone for audacity. In the 1660s, with a crew of just 28 in a single boat, he captured a Spanish galleon by boarding it at night, locking the crew below decks and sailing off with its cargo. His success inspired others, proving small bands could topple giants. These buccaneers, often former soldiers or indentured servants, thrived in the lawless Caribbean, where colonial wars gave them cover and loot gave them purpose. Their era laid the groundwork for the chaos to come, showing that piracy could be more than robbery. It could be a way of life. Peak-era legends. By the 1710s, piracy hit its zenith, producing legends whose exploits echo through history. Edward Teach, better known as Blackbeard, was the era's boogeyman. Operating from 1716 to 1718, he cultivated terror as a weapon, braiding slow-burning fuses into his beard to wreathe his face in smoke during battles. His 1718 blockade of Charleston, South Carolina, was a masterstroke. Holding the city hostage for medical supplies, he extorted without firing a shot. Commanding the Queen Anne's Revenge, a 40-gun behemoth, he captured 20 ships in 2 years, amassing a fortune but spending it as fast on rum and revelry. Blackbeard's end came at Ocracoke Inlet in 1718, cut down in a bloody duel with British naval officer Robert Maynard. His head hung from the bowsprit as a warning. Yet his theatricality ensured his legend outlived him, making him the face of piracy. Bartholomew "Black Bart" Roberts was the era's most prolific pirate, capturing over 400 vessels from 1719 to 1722. A reluctant pirate, pressed into service after his merchant ship was taken, Roberts turned pragmatist, targeting ships from Brazil to Newfoundland. His strict discipline, no gambling, no women aboard, kept crews loyal, and his bold raids, like capturing 11 slave ships off Whydah in 1722, netted fortunes in gold dust. Roberts' signature was his flamboyant attire, crimson breeches, gold chains, and a feathered hat, signalling defiance to the end. Killed in a naval battle off Cape Lopez, his body was dumped overboard to avoid capture, cementing his mystique. Diverse pirates. Piracy wasn't just a man's game, it attracted those society shunned. Anne Bonny and Mary Red, two of the era's few documented female pirates, defied norms with ferocity. Bonny, born in Ireland around 1700, fled an abusive marriage to join Calico Jack Rackham's crew, dressing as a man to fight alongside them. Mary Red, raised as a boy in England, joined after her merchant ship was captured. Their 1720 trial in Jamaica revealed their skill. Bonny's fiery taunt to Rackham, "If you'd fought like a man, you wouldn't hang like a dog," became legend. Both escaped execution by pleading their bellies, claiming pregnancy, though Red died in jail, while Bonny's fate remains a mystery. Their stories highlight piracy's appeal to those seeking freedom from rigid social cages. Other outliers included Samuel Bellamy, the Prince of Pirates, who captured 53 ships in 1716 to 1717, preaching equality while amassing wealth rivaling a duke's. His ship, the Whydah, sank off Cape Cod, leaving treasures still recovered today. Charles Vane, a Nassau firebrand, rejected royal pardons and raided until his 1721 hanging. Stede de Bonnet, the gentleman pirate, abandoned his Barbados plantation for piracy, despite no sailing experience, only to be betrayed and hanged in 1718. These figures, slaves, women, idealists, and eccentrics, show piracy's diversity, drawing from every corner of society to challenge the status quo. These pirates weren't just raiders, they were symbols of rebellion, their stories blending fact with folklore. Their bases gave them roots, but their audacity gave them wings, soaring into legend as the seas turned against them. Part 5. Significant Events and Battles. The Golden Age of Piracy wasn't just defined by its rogues or their lairs. It was forged in the fire of audacious raids and desperate clashes that shook empires and etched names into history. From city-sacking spectacles to naval showdowns, these events showcased pirates' daring, their knack for exploiting imperial weaknesses, and the inevitable backlash that spelled their doom. The period from the 1650s to the 1730s saw hundreds of raids, but a few stand out as turning points that shaped the era's arc, moments of triumph and tragedy that made the black flag both feared and fleeting. Let's dive into the most significant raids and battles, tracing the chaos from the buccaneers' early conquests to the brutal confrontations that marked piracy's twilight. Iconic raids and heists. The Golden Age kicked off with raids that proved pirates could rival armies. In 1668, Henry Morgan led the sack of Portobello, a Spanish stronghold in Panama. With 400 men, Morgan stormed the city's forts at dawn, using priests and nuns as human shields to deter cannon fire a ruthless tactic that worked. His haul, 250,000 pieces of eight, plus silks and jewels, enough to fund Jamaica's economy for a year. The raid humiliated Spain and emboldened buccaneers, showing that audacity could topple fortified cities. Morgan's 1671 attack on Panama City was even bolder. Leading 1,400 men across the isthmus, he burned the city to ash, looting 400,000 pieces of eight despite fierce resistance. The raid pushed England and Spain toward peace talks, as Madrid demanded Morgan's head, yet he was knighted instead, proof of piracy's political clout. In the 1690s, the pirate round produced another legendary heist, Henry Every's 1695 capture of the Ganges Sawai, a Mughal treasure ship in the Red Sea. Every, commanding the Fancy, with 150 men, ambushed the heavily armed vessel carrying pilgrims and riches worth $100 million today, gold, silver, and gems bound for Mecca. After a bloody boarding action, Every's crew looted the ship and vanished to Madagascar, sparking a diplomatic crisis. The Mughal emperor threatened to expel the East India Company, forcing England to launch its first global manhunt for a pirate. Every's escape cemented his myth, but it also turned governments against pirates, ending the era of tacit tolerance. Fast forward to 1718, and Blackbeard's blockade of Charleston, South Carolina, stunned the colonies. For a week, he anchored the Queen Anne's Revenge across the harbor, seizing 8 ships and holding passengers hostage for medical supplies. His theatrical menace, fuses smoking in his beard, ensured compliance without a shot fired. The bloodless coup netted him medicines and gold, but it also provoked colonial outrage, setting the stage for his downfall. These raids weren't just about loot. They were psychological blows, exposing empire's vulnerabilities and forcing merchants to reroute trade at massive cost. Naval confrontations and turning points. As piracy surged, empires struck back, leading to battles that marked the Golden Age's decline. The 1718 Battle of Ocracoke Inlet was a pivotal clash. Blackbeard, with 60 men on 2 sloops, faced Lieutenant Robert Maynard's naval force off North Carolina. Expecting an easy victory, Blackbeard boarded Maynard's ship, only to fall into a trap. Hidden sailors ambushed his crew. In a brutal melee, Blackbeard took 5 bullets and 20 sword wounds before collapsing. His head later hung from Maynard's bowsprit. The battle killed piracy's most feared figure and signaled a new era of aggressive naval patrols, with Britain deploying sloops to match pirates' speed. Another turning point came in 1718 with the fall of Nassau, the pirate republic. Governor Woodes Rogers, a former privateer, arrived with a royal pardon and a fleet to reclaim the Bahamas. Charles Vane, defiant to the end, fired on Rogers' ships and escaped, but most pirates, including Benjamin Hornigold, accepted the pardon. Nassau's recapture crippled the Caribbean's pirate hub, forcing survivors to scatter to less defensible bases. By 1720, the Bahamas were under Crown control, with gallows erected to deter holdouts. The final nail came in 1722, off Cape Lopez, West Africa, where Bartholomew Roberts met his end. Roberts, with 400 captures under his belt, faced Captain Challoner Ogle's HMS Swallow. Outgunned, Roberts fought to the last, dying in his crimson coat when grapeshot tore through his throat. His crew, demoralized, surrendered, and 52 were hanged in the largest pirate trial of the era. The battle crushed the Atlantic's last major pirate fleet, as Roberts' death symbolized the end of large-scale piracy. By 1726, intensified patrols and bounties had reduced pirate numbers by 80%, with only scattered rogues remaining. These events, raids that shook empires and battles that broke pirates, defined the Golden Age's rise and fall. They showed piracy's power to disrupt global trade, capturing over 2,400 ships and costing merchants millions, but also the inevitability of imperial response. The seas, once a lawless frontier, were tamed by cannon and rope, leaving only legends in their wake. Part 6. Life of a Pirate. Code, Daily Realities, and Society. Beyond the battles and plunder, the Golden Age was shaped by the gritty reality of life aboard a pirate ship, a world of camaraderie, hardship, and makeshift democracy that set pirates apart from the rigid societies they fled. Far from the romanticized image of endless rum and treasure, pirate life was a brutal gamble, blending freedom with danger, equality with anarchy. From the codes that governed their ships to the daily struggles of disease and dissent, pirates crafted a unique society that challenged the norms of their time. Let's peel back the myth to explore the rules they lived by and the harsh truths of their existence. The pirate code and governance. Pirate ships were floating experiments in democracy, a stark contrast to the tyrannical hierarchies of merchant and naval vessels. The pirate code, articles of agreement signed by crews, was the backbone of this system. Bartholomew Roberts' 1720 Code, for example, mandated equal shares of loot, except for officers, who got 1.5 shares, banned gambling to prevent fights, and required lights out by 8 p.m. to maintain order. Other codes, like those of Charles Vane, ensured weapons were kept ready, with deserters facing marooning, abandonment on a desolate island with a pistol and 1 bullet. If a man was injured, he received compensation, a rare provision for the era. Captains, elected by vote, could be deposed for cowardice or cruelty, as happened to Stedebonnet when his crew ousted him for incompetence. This democracy wasn't perfect. Captains like Blackbeard ruled by charisma and fear, but it gave sailors agency unheard of on merchant ships, where floggings were routine and pay was a pittance. The quartermaster, often equal in power to the captain, oversaw loot distribution and discipline, ensuring fairness. For example, Edward Lowe's quartermaster mediated disputes, preventing mutinies. These codes, often written on blood-stained parchment, were practical. They kept diverse crews, English, French, African, even Native American, united under a common cause. Escaped slaves, making up 20 to 30% of some crews, found a voice in votes, a rarity in a world that chained them. The code's egalitarianism drew men to piracy, offering a taste of justice in an unjust age. Harsh realities at sea. Life aboard a pirate ship was no endless revel. The sea was a merciless master, and survival demanded grit. Food was a constant struggle. Salted beef and pork, often crawling with weevils, was the staple, washed down with rum or brackish water. Scurvy, caused by vitamin C deficiency, rotted gums and reopened wounds. Blackbeard's Charleston blockade was sparked by a desperate need for medicines to combat disease. Tropical fevers like dysentery, the bloody flux, killed more pirates than battles, with cramped, filthy holds breeding contagion. A 1717 account from Samuel Bellamy's Wider describes crewmen dying in droves during a Caribbean storm, their bodies tossed overboard to lighten the ship. Living conditions were brutal. Pirates slept on open decks or in hammocks below, soaked by leaks and battered by storms. Repairs were constant. Careening, beaching a ship to scrape barnacles, was backbreaking, often done under threat of attack. Multicultural crews, while diverse, sparked tensions. Language barriers and rivalries led to brawls, quelled only by the quartermaster's whip or the captain's pistol. Yet, there was camaraderie. Music, like sea shanties or fiddles, filled idle nights, and gambling, despite bans, was rife. Pirates like Roberts banned women aboard to avoid jealousy, but others, like Calico Jack, flouted this, with Anne Bonny and Mary Red sparking scandal. Violence was a fact of life. While pirates preferred intimidation, hoisting the Jolly Roger to scare merchants into surrender, resistance meant bloodshed. Edward Lowe was notorious for torturing captives, cutting off ears or lips to extract information. Mutinies were common. Charles Vane faced 3 in 1718 before his capture. The average pirate career lasted 2 years, ended by battle, disease, or the gallows. Yet for many, especially escaped slaves or abused sailors, piracy offered a fleeting chance at autonomy, a life where skill with a cutlass or courage under fire earned respect no shore could offer. This society, rough-hewn and raw, was a rebellion against the era's norms. Pirates built a world where merit trumped birth, but it was fragile, held together by greed and grit until empires struck back. Part 7. Myths versus Reality. The Golden Age of Piracy, spanning the 1650s to the 1730s, has been immortalized in tales of swashbuckling heroes, buried treasure, and daring escapades. But how much of what we think we know about pirates is true? Popular culture, books, films, and folklore has draped these sea rogues in a romantic veil, conjuring images of peg-legged captains, treasure maps marked with an X, and dramatic plank walkings. Yet, the reality of piracy was often far grittier, more complex, and less glamorous than the myths suggest. By peeling back the layers of fiction, we uncover a world of strategic outlaws, desperate survivors, and fleeting rebellions against a brutal system. This section dives deep into the myths that have shaped our view of pirates, debunks them with historical evidence, and reveals the stark truths of their existence, showing how the Golden Age's legacy was both exaggerated and misunderstood. Debunking popular tropes. The pirate of popular imagination is a caricature, a one-eyed, peg-legged rogue with a parrot on his shoulder, barking orders to make captives walk the plank while clutching a map to buried treasure. These tropes, born from 19th century novels and 20th century Hollywood, are largely fiction, woven from a kernel of truth stretched to fantastical extremes. Let's start with buried treasure, perhaps the most enduring pirate myth. Stories like Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island, 1883, cemented the idea that pirates routinely buried chests of gold, marked by cryptic maps. In reality, buried treasure was exceedingly rare. Pirates were spendthrifts, not savers. Their hauls, gold, silver, silks, or spices, were quickly divided among the crew, spent on rum, repairs, or bribes to corrupt governors. Captain William Kidd, executed in 1701, is one of the few documented cases of a pirate burying treasure, hiding gold and gems on Gardiner's Island, New York, to use as leverage during his trial. Even then, it was recovered quickly, and no elaborate map was involved. Historical records, such as ship logs and trial transcripts, show pirates preferred liquid assets, Spanish doubloons or pieces of eight, that could be fenced in ports like Port Royal or Nassau. The idea of hidden hoards was amplified by romanticized tales as writers filled gaps in pirate history with adventure. The walk-the-plank trope is equally fabricated. Popularized in the 19th century by novels and later by films like Peter Pan, 1904, the image of pirates forcing victims to leap to their doom from a wooden plank is almost entirely fictional. No contemporary accounts from the Golden Age, court records, sailor diaries, or even pirate confessions describe this practice. Pirates disposed of captives ruthlessly but efficiently. Resistant crews were often killed outright, thrown overboard, or marooned on desolate islands, as Charles Vane did to a merchant captain in 1718. Marooning was a preferred punishment, leaving victims with a pistol and minimal supplies, a fate both cruel and practical, avoiding the need for a theatrical plank. The myth likely arose from dramatized accounts, as writers sought vivid imagery to captivate readers. Similarly, the parrot-on-the-shoulder cliché, while charming, has little basis. Exotic animals like monkeys or parrots were occasionally kept as pets or trade goods. Bartholomew Roberts' crew had a monkey aboard, but they weren't standard accessories. The trope likely stems from Treasure Island's Long John Silver, whose parrot became a cultural shorthand. Peg legs and eye patches, iconic in pirate imagery, are another exaggeration. Amputations were common at sea due to battle injuries or accidents, Cannon misfires or snapped rigging could crush limbs, but wooden prosthetics were rare. Most injured pirates, if they survived, retired or served in non-combat roles, like cooks or quartermasters. John Silver's peg leg in Treasure Island popularized the image, but historical evidence, such as crew lists or medical logs, suggests crutches or slings were more practical. Eye patches, too, are dubious. While eye injuries occurred, no primary sources confirm their widespread use. A 2007 theory suggested pirates wore patches to keep one eye adjusted for dark below-decks fighting, but this lacks contemporary support and seems more speculative than factual. These physical tropes were amplified by early theatre and cinema, where visual distinctiveness trumped historical accuracy. Pirates as drunken, chaotic revelers is another half-truth. While rum flowed freely, Henry Morgan's crew famously drank their way through Port Royal's taverns. Many captains enforced strict discipline. Bartholomew Roberts banned excessive drinking aboard, mandating lights out by 8 p.m. to maintain order. The myth of constant debauchery ignores the need for sober navigation and combat readiness. A drunken crew was a liability in a storm or battle. This image was fueled by sensationalized accounts, like those in Charles Johnson's A General History of the Pirates, 1724, which exaggerated pirate excesses to thrill readers. In truth, pirates balanced revelry with pragmatism, their survival hinging on sharp wits as much as sharp blades. The true grit of pirate existence. Beneath the myths lies a reality far less glamorous but equally compelling. Pirate life was a brutal, high-stakes gamble, offering freedom at the cost of constant peril. Far from the swashbuckling heroes of film, most pirates were ordinary men, sailors, laborers, or escaped slaves, driven by desperation or defiance. The average pirate career lasted just 2 years, a fleeting rebellion ended by battle, disease, or execution. Historical records estimate that of the 5,000 pirates active during the peak years, 1715 to 1726, over 1,500 were captured or killed, with 400 hanged in public spectacles from London to Charleston. Trials, like those of Blackbeard's crew in 1718, reveal men who joined for survival, not adventure. Former merchant sailors paid pennies, or Africans fleeing plantation whips. Their lives were less about romance and more about seizing a fleeting chance at agency in a world stacked against them. Disease was the greatest killer, outpacing cannon or cutlass. Scurvy, caused by vitamin C deficiency, rotted gums and reopened wounds. Dysentery, dubbed the bloody flux, swept through cramped ships, killing dozens in weeks. Blackbeard's 1718 Charleston blockade was driven by a desperate need for medicines to combat venereal diseases and fevers ravaging his crew. Food was another hardship. Salted meat, often rancid, and hardtack crawling with weevils were staples. Water stored in barrels turned green with algae, forcing reliance on rum or captured wine. A 1717 log from Samuel Bellamy's Wider describes crewmen eating raw fish after provisions ran dry, a grim contrast to the myth of endless feasts. Violence was strategic, not constant. Pirates preferred intimidation, hoisting the Jolly Roger to scare merchants into surrender, over bloodshed, which risked crew losses. Blackbeard's theatrical fuses and Bartholomew Roberts's crimson coat were calculated to terrify, often winning prizes without a fight. But when resisted, pirates were merciless. Edward Lowe, a sadistic outlier, cut off captives' ears or burned ships with crews aboard, as recorded in 1723 trial accounts. Such brutality was less about savagery and more about sending a message: surrender or suffer. Most pirates, however, were pragmatic, sparing cooperative crews to encourage future surrenders. This contrasts with the myth of indiscriminate slaughter, which served to demonize pirates in colonial propaganda. Pirate society was remarkably diverse, challenging the image of a uniform band of rogues. Crews were melting pots, English, French, Dutch, African, Native American, and even Indian sailors mixed freely. Escaped slaves, like Black Caesar on Blackbeard's ship, comprised up to 30% of some crews, finding equality in the pirate code that was unthinkable on land. Women like Anne Bonny and Mary Read, though rare, fought as fiercely as men, their 1720 trial revealing lives shaped by hardship, not whimsy. This diversity was a strength, blending navigational knowledge and combat skills, but also a source of tension. Language barriers and cultural clashes sparked brawls, quelled only by strict codes or the quartermaster's pistol. The myth of pirates as carefree rebels ignores their precarious existence. They lived outside the law, but not without structure. The pirate code, as seen in Roberts's articles, mandated equal shares, injury compensation, and punishments like marooning for betrayal. Captains were elected, a stark contrast to merchant ships' autocratic commanders. This democracy drew men from oppressive systems, merchant sailors flogged for minor infractions, or slaves branded for fleeing. Yet freedom came with a catch: constant danger from navies, storms, and internal strife. Mutinies were common. Charles Vane faced 3 in 1718, each sparked by disputes over loot or tactics. Betrayal was a risk. Stade de Bonnet was turned over by his own crew in 1718, weary of his ineptitude. Pirates' cultural impact was shaped by their enemies as much as their actions. Colonial governments and merchants vilified them in pamphlets, exaggerating their cruelty to justify crackdowns. Charles Johnson's A General History of the Pirates, a mix of fact and fiction, painted pirates as larger-than-life villains, laying the groundwork for later novels. By the 19th century, works like Treasure Island and The Pirates of Penzance, 1879, romanticized them, turning gritty outlaws into adventurous anti-heroes. Films like Pirates of the Caribbean, 2003, further polished the image, adding humor and heroism, absent from the historical record. Yet, these myths obscure the reality. Pirates were products of their time, rebelling against a world of exploitation, but doomed by their own excesses and the empires they defied. The true pirate wasn't a cartoon villain or a dashing rogue, but a complex figure, part revolutionary, part opportunist. They challenged hierarchies, offering a glimpse of equality in a brutal world, but their lives were short, their victories fleeting. As we move to the decline of the Golden Age, we'll see how these rebels fell, their legends outlasting their lives. Decline of the Golden Age. The Golden Age of Piracy, that wild tempest of rebellion and plunder from the 1650s to the 1730s, didn't fade with a whimper, but burned out in a clash of steel, rope, and imperial might. By the early 1720s, the black flag that once struck terror across the seas was tattered, its bearers hunted, scattered, or swinging from gallows. The decline was not a single event, but a convergence of forces, strengthened navies, cunning diplomacy, and the sheer exhaustion of a lawless life caught up with the pirates. What had been a global scourge, disrupting trade routes, looting millions in gold and silver, and defying empires, crumbled under the weight of organized resistance and internal fractures. This section explores the key factors that ended the Golden Age, the pivotal moments that broke the pirate strongholds, and the grim fates of those who dared to sail under the Jolly Roger. Factors leading to the end. The decline of piracy was driven by a perfect storm of imperial resolve, economic shifts, and social pressures that made the pirates' life unsustainable. First, European navies, particularly Britain's Royal Navy, ramped up their efforts after decades of neglect. The War of the Spanish Succession, 1701 to 1714, had stretched naval resources thin, allowing pirates like Blackbeard and Bartholomew Roberts to exploit weakly patrolled waters. But by 1718, peace allowed Britain to redirect ships and funds to anti-piracy campaigns. The Royal Navy deployed fast sloops, smaller, agile vessels like the HMS Swallow, to match the pirates' nimble sloops, which had outrun lumbering warships. By 1720, over 20 new naval vessels patrolled the Caribbean, equipped with seasoned crews and orders to hunt pirates without mercy. France and Spain followed suit, with Spanish guardacostas, Coast Guard ships, targeting pirate haunts along Cuba and Hispaniola. This escalation shrank the safe havens where pirates could careen ships or sell loot, turning the seas into a deadly gauntlet. Second, colonial governments tightened the noose through legal and diplomatic measures. The 1717 and 1718 royal pardons, issued by King George I, were a masterstroke of soft power. These offered amnesty to pirates who surrendered by a deadline, splitting crews between those eager for a clean slate and hardliners like Charles Vane, who rejected the offer. In Jamaica, Governor Nicholas Loys, once complicit with buccaneers, turned enforcer, hanging 50 pirates in 1718 alone. Colonial ports, previously fences for pirate goods, began refusing stolen cargo under pressure from London and Madrid. The East India Company, stung by losses like Henry Every's 1695 raid, lobbied for harsher laws, leading to the 1721 Piracy Act, which expanded the death penalty for aiding pirates. This choked off the economic lifeline of places like Nassau, where merchants once thrived on pirate gold. Third, piracy's internal weaknesses hastened its fall. The egalitarian codes that drew men to piracy, equal shares, elected captains, also bred instability. Mutinies were rampant. Charles Vane faced 3 in 1718, losing his ship to Calico Jack Rackham. Crews, often drunk or divided by nationality or greed, squandered hauls on rum and gambling, leaving ships under-provisioned. Disease decimated crews. Scurvy and dysentery killed more than battles, with logs from Samuel Bellamy's Wider, 1717, noting 30% losses to illness in a single voyage. The promise of quick riches faded as captures grew harder. By 1720, heavily armed merchant convoys and fortified ports reduced easy targets. Pirates, once numbering 5,000 at their peak, 1715 to 1726, dwindled as men deserted for pardons or legitimate work, especially as colonial economies stabilized and offered jobs. Finally, public perception turned against pirates. Early buccaneers like Henry Morgan were folk heroes, weakening Spain for England's gain. But as pirates like Edward Lowe targeted all flags, including British and colonial ships, they alienated former allies. Propaganda, like Charles Johnson's A General History of the Pirates, 1724, painted them as monsters, amplifying tales of torture to justify crackdowns. Merchants, losing millions, equivalent to 2% of Atlantic trade annually, demanded action, and colonial governors complied to protect trade. The romantic rebel became a public enemy, with bounties posted from Charleston to Madagascar. Key turning points. Several pivotal moments marked the end of the Golden Age, each a hammer blow to piracy's foundations. The 1718 recapture of Nassau was a death knell for the pirate republic. Woodes Rogers, a former privateer turned governor, arrived in July with a fleet of 7 ships, a royal pardon, and orders to restore order. His arrival caught pirates off guard. Benjamin Hornigold, once a Nassau kingpin, accepted the pardon and turned hunter, betraying former allies. Charles Vane, ever defiant, fired on Rogers' fleet and escaped in a stolen sloop, but his flight left Nassau leaderless. By early 1719, Rogers had fortified the harbour, built a gallows, and hanged 8 pirates in a public spectacle, breaking the Bahamas' status as a pirate haven. The loss of Nassau forced survivors to scatter to riskier bases like Madagascar or West Africa, where isolation offered little protection. The 1718 Battle of Ocracoke Inlet was another turning point, felling piracy's most infamous figure, Blackbeard. Edward Teach, with his fearsome Queen Anne's Revenge, had terrorized the Atlantic, but his hubris led to his downfall. Lieutenant Robert Maynard, sent by Virginia's governor, lured Blackbeard into a trap off North Carolina. On November 22, 1718, Maynard's sloops engaged Blackbeard's adventure in a shallow inlet. Blackbeard, expecting an easy win, boarded Maynard's ship, only to face hidden sailors who cut him down in a brutal melee. 5 bullets and 20 sword wounds ended his reign. His severed head, hung from Maynard's bowsprit, was paraded in Williamsburg, a grim warning that even legends weren't untouchable. The battle spurred colonial governors to fund more patrols, shrinking pirates' safe zones. The 1722 Battle of Cape Lopez delivered the final blow. Bartholomew Roberts, the era's most prolific pirate with over 400 captures, had defied navies across 3 continents. But on February 10, 1722, HMS Swallow, commanded by Captain Challoner Ogle, caught Roberts' fleet off West Africa. Roberts, resplendent in crimson and gold, stood at the helm of the Royal Fortune, rallying his crew. A grapeshot tore through his throat, and he collapsed, dead at 39. His crew, demoralized, surrendered after a 2-hour fight. The subsequent trial in Cape Coast Castle was the largest of its kind. 252 men tried, 52 hanged, their bodies left dangling as a deterrent. Roberts' death shattered the last major pirate fleet, as his unmatched success had inspired hundreds to take up the black flag. Without his leadership, piracy fragmented into small, scattered bands. Other events sealed the decline. The 1717 to 1718 pardons lured over 1,000 pirates to surrender, thinning crews. Those who refused, like Calico Jack Rackham, were hunted relentlessly. Rackham's 1720 capture off Jamaica, alongside Anne Bonny and Mary Read, ended in a high-profile trial that galvanized anti-piracy sentiment. By 1726, intensified patrols, Britain alone stationed 12 warships in the Caribbean, had reduced pirate captures by 80%, from 2,400 ships in the 1710s to under 500 in the 1720s. Colonial courts, once lax, became merciless. Charleston executed 30 pirates in 1718, while London's execution dock saw 100 hangings from 1715 to 1,725. Madagascar's pirate settlements, once thriving, were abandoned by 1,730 as naval raids and local resistance cut supply lines. 8.3. The Aftermath. The decline wasn't just a military defeat, it reshaped the seas. Empires, stung by losses, fortified trade routes with convoys and armed escorts, making piracy unprofitable. The British Navigation Acts of the 1720s tightened trade regulations, choking off black markets that sustained pirates. Colonial ports like Boston and Bridgetown, once complicit, became hubs for anti-piracy operations, with bounties turning neighbors into informers. Surviving pirates turned to smaller crimes, smuggling or coastal raids, but the grand fleets of the Golden Age were gone. A few, like Edward Lowe, persisted into the mid-1720s, but their lone wolf raids lacked the scale of Roberts or Blackbeard. The human cost was stark. Of the estimated 5,000 pirates at the era's peak, most met grim ends. 1,500 captured or killed, 400 hanged, and countless others lost to disease or storms. Survivors who took pardons often returned to poverty, their brief wealth squandered. Yet the decline birthed a paradox. As pirates vanished, their legend grew. Trials and executions, reported in newspapers and pamphlets, fed public fascination, while a general history of the pirates turned rogues into icons. The Golden Age's end marked a shift in maritime power. Empires reclaimed the seas, but the pirates' defiant spirit lingered, a spark for future rebellions.